What if I told you, almost nobody joins a cult knowing it's a cult? A cult isn't just a weird group wearing robes or chanting in the woods. At its core, it's a system of psychological control. There's usually one leader or one ideology demanding absolute loyalty. Not just agreement, devotion. And most people think only stupid people fall for that. But that's not true. People usually join during vulnerable moments. Loneliness, grief, confusion, heartbreak, lack of purpose. The cult doesn't begin with fear. It begins with belonging. It gives people certainty in a world that feels chaotic. Rules, identity, community. At first, it can feel like the answer to everything because cults don't sell danger, they sell meaning. And once someone emotionally depends on that meaning, control becomes much easier. Cults don't recruit randomly. They hunt for emotional cracks. Most cult recruitment doesn't happen through force. It happens through emotional timing. Someone loses a relationship, moves to a new city, feels invisible, feels lost. That's when recruiters appear, and they're often incredibly friendly. They listen carefully, they compliment you constantly, they make you feel understood, not because they care deeply about you, but because they understand human psychology. People who feel disconnected are easier to influence, and cults know exactly how to create emotional dependency. They don't usually say, "Join our cult." They say, "You belong here." To someone desperate for connection, those words can feel life-changing. The first stage of control often feels exactly like love. Psychologists call it love bombing. It's when someone is flooded with affection, praise, attention, and validation. Suddenly everyone is supportive. Everyone understands you. Everyone says you're special. And your brain responds powerfully to this. Because humans are wired for social acceptance. The more emotionally overwhelmed someone becomes, the faster trust forms. That's why love bombing is so addictive, especially for people who felt ignored or rejected before. But here's the dangerous part. The affection is often conditional. As long as you obey, you receive love. Question things, and it disappears. So eventually people stop thinking independently, because they fear losing the emotional high. Control becomes easier when outside voices disappear. After emotional attachment comes separation. The cult slowly creates an us versus them mentality. Friends become distractions. Family becomes negative influence. The outside world becomes dangerous, and little by little, the person pulls away from everyone else. Isolation is powerful because humans need social reality. We understand truth partly through other people. But when someone only hears one perspective every day, their worldview changes. That's why cults isolate members emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically. Once the support system is gone, the cult becomes their entire reality, and leaving suddenly feels impossible. Because outside the group, they no longer know who they are. If you control information, you control perception. One of the strongest forms of manipulation is information control. Cults often decide what members can watch, read, listen to, or even think about. Criticism is labeled dangerous. Questions are treated as betrayal. Over time, members stop trusting their own judgment. Instead, they rely completely on the group for truth. This creates something called thought reform, where people slowly lose the ability to objectively analyze reality, because every piece of information is filtered through the leader's ideology. And when someone only hears one version of reality long enough, that version starts feeling unquestionable. Even obvious contradictions become easy to ignore, because protecting the belief system becomes emotionally safer than confronting reality. The goal isn't just obedience, it's transformation. Cults don't just want followers, they want to rebuild identity itself. Your beliefs, your habits, your language, even your personality. Slowly, individuality gets stripped away. Members are rewarded for conformity and punished for independence. Over time, people stop asking, "What do I think?" and start asking, "What would the group approve of?" This process can become so extreme that members no longer recognize themselves because their identity has fused with the cult. And once someone's sense of self depends entirely on the group, leaving feels psychologically terrifying, not just because they lose community, but because they lose the version of themselves the cult created. Fear keeps people trapped longer than loyalty does. Once emotional dependence forms, fear takes over. Fear of punishment, fear of isolation, fear of losing purpose, fear of the outside world. The cult creates a problem, then presents itself as the only solution. And psychologically, that's incredibly powerful, because humans naturally move towards safety. So even when members start doubting things, they stay. Not because they fully believe anymore, but because leaving feels more terrifying than remaining. This creates learned dependence, where the leader becomes the protector, the guide, the emotional lifeline, and the longer someone stays inside that system, the harder escape becomes. Because fear slowly replaces free thought. Leaving a cult can feel like destroying your entire reality. People often ask, if it's so bad, why don't they just leave? Because leaving doesn't only mean walking away from a group. It can mean losing friends, family, purpose, identity, and meaning all at once. Some members have sacrificed years of their lives. Others gave away money, careers, relationships, everything. And admitting the truth would mean admitting they were manipulated. That psychological pain can be overwhelming. So instead, many stay trapped, not because they're weak, but because the human brain struggles to accept painful contradictions, especially when someone's entire world depends on the belief continuing to feel real. Most cult leaders don't just want followers, they want power. While every cult leader is different, many share similar psychological traits: extreme charisma, manipulation skills, narcissism, need for control, lack of empathy. They understand how to influence emotion, how to create dependency, how to reward obedience, how to punish doubt. And often, they slowly begin believing their own mythology. Some see themselves as saviors, others see people as tools. But almost all cult systems revolve around one thing: power. Because when people surrender independent thought, they become easier to control. And history has shown repeatedly that unchecked power combined with blind devotion can become incredibly dangerous. The uncomfortable truth is, almost anyone can be manipulated under the right conditions. Most people want to believe, I'd never fall for something like that. But human psychology is far more fragile than we like to admit. Every person wants connection, certainty, purpose, identity, love. And when those needs become intense enough, manipulation becomes easier. That's why cults exist in many forms: religious groups, political movements, online communities, self-help organizations, even toxic relationships. The methods are often the same: isolation, fear, dependency, information control, identity manipulation. The lesson isn't only weak people get manipulated. The lesson is human beings are vulnerable to influence, which is why critical thinking matters so much. Question absolute authority. Question groups demanding blind loyalty. Question anyone who discourages independent thought. Because the moment someone controls how you think, they begin controlling who you become. And the scariest part: manipulation rarely feels dangerous in the beginning. It feels comforting. The mind is powerful, but in the wrong hands, it can be rewritten.